Good morning to you from our very handsome new studio. There's a huge and fascinating dilemma facing the country this winter. Do ministers listen to the increasingly desperate pleas for help from a big range of industries? Do they offer subsidies for pricey energy, let in more foreign workers in order to avoid queues, closures and shortages? Or do they hang tough, as the Prime Minister said he would last week, and force company bosses to pay higher wages here? Stick with the policy or flinch and then fold? Well, I'm joined live in the studio this morning by both sides of that argument, by the business minister who's been sitting down with the company bosses, Kwasi Kwarteng, and by the founder of one of Britain's big six energy companies, OVO's Stephen Fitzpatrick. Giving a Labour perspective on the world energy market, the Shadow Trade Secretary, Emily Thornberry. And we haven't even mentioned coronavirus yet. It's all over, isn't it? Maybe not. I'll be joined by Jenny Harries, the head of the UK Health Security Agency. And George Clooney's been telling me why he felt a very personal need to direct his new movie.
This was a really kind film.
It is.
It was gentle, and I needed that. And I felt like if I needed that, maybe other people might feel the same way.
Kind and gentle film, kind and gentle show. Reviewing the news, Sebastian Payne of the Financial Times and Minette Batters speaking on behalf of the farmers for the NFU. But first, the news headlines with Roger Johnson.
Andrew, thank you. Good morning. The Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, has defended the government's handling of the energy crisis. Several energy suppliers have described the price cap system for regulating household bills as not fit for purpose amid spiralling gas costs. But writing in today's Sunday Express, Mr Kwarteng said that it would remain in place to protect consumers. The French authorities are calling on the British government to honour its promise to pay them more than £50 million to help them to try to stop migrants crossing the Channel by boat. Hundreds of people have made the journey in the past 2 days, leading to further tensions between France and the UK. Lebanon's electricity grid has shut down, leaving the entire country without power for the second weekend. Officials say that it's unlikely that supplies will resume before Monday amid an ongoing economic crisis. The blackout began yesterday after the country's two largest power stations shut down due to a shortage of fuel. The variety of plant and animal life in the UK is so depleted that it could cause an ecological meltdown. Scientists at the Natural History Museum say that the UK only has 53% of its biodiversity left, ranking in the bottom 10% of all countries. The researchers say that the consequences could mean a future where nations are no longer able to produce enough energy, food or timber to meet the needs of their populations. And in boxing, Tyson Fury has knocked out Deontay Wilder to retain his title as the WBC heavyweight champion of the world. Fury knocked Wilder out in the 11th round of their bout in Las Vegas. That's it from me. The next news here on BBC One is at 1 o'clock. Back to you, Andrew.
Tyson Fury. What would happen if politicians had sort of names they'd made up to represent themselves? A very interesting thought. As ever, to the front pages, however. Now, the royal family are all over every front page. There's been some very heavy briefing going on. There's the Sun on Sunday. No way back for Prince Andrew, it says. Prince William sees him, it claims, as a threat to the monarchy. The Sunday Times has a similarly big briefing story. Met officers are quizzing Andrew's sex accuser, they say. Andrew's legal team apparently going on the offensive. We'll be talking more a bit about that later on. The Mirror has the story about Boris Johnson after the Tory party conference going on holiday to Marbella. What cost of living crisis, it says. The Mail on Sunday has the same story on its front page, and inside a rather more friendly pro-Johnson take on all of that. He's very, very tired. They say he's been working very hard. The Sunday Express our big story of the day, which is the energy prices. We will keep you warm during the winter, says Kwasi Kwarteng, the business secretary, who is joining us later on the programme. The Observer has a different take on the labour shortage story that we've all been talking about the last week. It says a nursing crisis is sweeping wards as the NHS battles to find recruits. And then finally, on a different story, the Sunday Telegraph, the Irish border. Remember that story well? Boris Johnson faces a fresh Brexit clash with judges, apparently. Now then, I'm joined by Seb Payne and Minette Batters, as advertised, as promised. Seb, let's start with you. The gas price story is probably what most people at home are thinking about this morning.
Indeed, and in the Sunday Express, Kwasi Kwarteng, the business secretary, has written an article saying that he will make sure people can have energy they can afford throughout the winter, and he references the energy price cap, which is under huge strain at the moment by rising gas prices. And he mentions in this article that the wholesale price of gas is 250p a therm, and the price cap is keeping it 65p. So that shows how much this policy is doing to keep prices down. But he is saying as well that they are not going to open up more gas from Russia with the Nord Stream 2, and instead the focus should be on developing the UK's nuclear industry and going green.
But how long does that take? So that's decades ahead, isn't it? And we've all seen that terrifying spike in gas prices shooting up almost vertically, like some parts of the coronavirus epidemic, almost going right up like that. And the price cap, £139, I think now, that goes in April. So a lot of people will be wondering what happens to it then.
Exactly, and I think that at that point it's obviously going to be reviewed when you look at the wholesale price of gas. But really, this whole thing is quite odd because the price cap was a Labour policy. It was when Ed Miliband was running for Prime Minister in 2015, he pledged that cap, and it was brought in and pledged by Theresa May in 2017, and now the Conservatives are heralding it as something that is helping and protecting the consumer. I think the cap will inevitably have to be raised when it comes to that review point, but the fact is, for the moment, the government is hanging tight, and this is going to be very difficult for energy companies.
Absolutely, and we're ahead of COP, the great climate change conference in Glasgow coming up. And ahead of that, we're told the government wants to introduce all sorts of new green levies and move the levies from electricity onto gas to force people to get away from gas. Now, that's a very, very provocative policy. I think the New Statesman has had a really pretty comprehensive leak of what's likely.
Indeed, that we've got, as you said, COP26 coming up, and the government's hopeful for a series of Glasgow breakthroughs I've heard about, where they will set a plan to get to net zero, not just the general aspirations. And this piece in the New Statesman here sets out what's going to be in the government's plan. And the most striking thing about this is the onus is very much on private individuals to get heat pumps, which even with government subsidy are going to cost £5,000 or £6,000 on individuals, to get people to better insulate their homes as well. And when you put that on top of the pressure on fuel bills, you do have to wonder how this is all going to chime together and whether voters are going to be happy paying all this money.
I'm going to be talking about the effect of that on the red wall with you later on in this. But Minette, first of all, the briefing and the very long article in the Sunday Times magazine about Prince Andrew. I don't think I have read such a personally aggressive piece anywhere for a very, very long time. Members of the royal family, unnamed quoted, courtiers, unnamed quoted, and it really is a pretty devastating picture of him, isn't it?
It is devastating, and, you know, the sword of Damocles, there's some headlines out there, as you say, front page of The Sun, and the briefing, not only by royal courtiers, but, you know, the royal householders itself, Prince William being quoted, and the drip, drip, drip. You know, this is going on and on and on. Stories of Prince Andrew hiding behind his mother's skirt up in Balmoral. It's really, really not good. And one's got to feel desperately, I feel desperately for the Queen in all of this as the story continues to run.
That says that the story, which we were always told that Prince Andrew is her favourite child, isn't necessarily true. But in terms of kind of watching the hierarchy of the royal family and who's really in control, this seems a moment where Prince William is kind of gently shouldering his way to the front of the stage.
It does look like that. You know, he's not a man that says very much in the public domain, and so when he does say something, you feel, well, this is him really putting a marker down, because he does tend to only speak up when he has got actually something that he wants to put forward. So, and then, of course, we've got Prince Andrew's lawyers coming back and saying, actually, you know, they are going to aggressively defend this. So it feels almost like the start rather than the beginning of the end. Now,
the other big story that I've noticed this morning is about the vaccination of children. particularly in England, because we now have a lower rate of overall vaccination than some of the continental countries where we thought we were way ahead. You know, we were doing best, and now they're ahead of us, the French, the Spanish, the Germans and others. But that is above all because British children are not being vaccinated that heavily, are they?
The piece here...
Sunday Telegraph.
Sunday Telegraph, child vaccination. I mean, Scotland, clearly, they've got a quarter of children vaccinated in that age group, 12 to 15-year-olds, 10% only in England. I think there's a combining storm here of education, parents feeling confident. You know, they're talking about only 40% of parents feeling confident to get their children vaccinated. So the education that needs to happen to get parents to feel confident. But you've also got, you know, access. There's Glyn Potts saying, you know, head of Newman Roman Catholic Church in Oldham, talking about the challenges of enough people to go out and do these vaccinations. So the perfect storm, again, of Labour requirements, understanding, worries about the vaccine, creating this sort of perfect storm in England.
Really interesting. We're talking to Jenny Harries about that later in the show. Now, Seb, I know that you've been up and down the Red Wall all winter in your Mini. Was it a Mini you were driving around trying to work out what voters were really thinking? I alluded at the top of the show to a big dilemma facing the government. Do they hang tough on their policy of keeping out foreign workers and all the rest of it? And do they hang tough on higher taxes? In some ways, they're a surprisingly left-of-centre government, at least fiscally at the moment. And Tim Shipman, who we always look to for really good long reads in the Sunday Times, has written about the red Tory problem that the Conservative Party now faces under Boris Johnson. Tell us more.
Well, this is a very striking image you can see there with Boris Johnson lined up with some of the great communist figures of the past there. And I think this speaks to an idea of what is Johnsonism, that when Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, it was on that platform of getting Brexit done. Then in the 2019 election, he won that big majority by winning over parts of the UK, or England, I should say, that have never voted Conservative before. And as you said, I've visited a lot of those places for my book and to try and figure out what they want. And what's so interesting about Tim Shipman's long read here is, are there just too many inherent contradictions in what Johnsonism is trying to do? Because when you looked at his conference speech last week, he was straddling the left and the right. He was praising bankers and businesses and entrepreneurs on the one hand and pledging to keep migration down. And on the other hand, he was pledging more state spending and higher taxes. And it's something we've not seen for quite a long time in British politics.
You were at the Tory conference. Did you see those strains beginning to appear in sort of late-night parties and conference scenes all around the place?
You did, actually, that you could see. It was really, in some ways, tax was the dog that didn't bark at Tory conference.
I thought that, yes.
But if you spoke to people after a couple of glasses of champagne that was flowing very much in Manchester this year, you could see they are unhappy. Many Tories in their heart are not Johnsonian. They are low tax. They do want a smaller state. But they do also realise this is what they need to do to keep onto the red wall. And I think it's probably true because in 2016, 17 and 19, big part of England voted for lower migration, and that's what he's going for.
Minette, all week we have seen pictures of distraught pig farmers on our televisions. I had an exchange with Boris Johnson about whether there was going to be, in his words, a hecatomb of pigs being destroyed, 120,000, biggest cull, I think, in the history of British farming. And yet, those pigs haven't been mostly killed yet. And some people will be wondering, was this all just a bit of lobbying? Is this shroud waving? Is it really going to happen?
It's most certainly not shroud waving. We know that 4,500 pigs are set to be slaughtered next week. And this is a very, very challenging situation for pig farmers. Indeed, we are potentially looking at the end of the size of the pig farming structure that we have in this country unless we sort it. So the ask is, because we've got such a shortage of butchers in our processing plants, the ask is that we look at the visa scheme for the skilled workers and we look to lower the requirement on English. That would access the pool to the vital butchers that are needed to bring here at the moment. We've got agencies out in South America who are looking at it. We know there are people who can come here, but we need to be looking at that visa scheme now.
I'm doing that now, right. Now, like a lot of people, I have been getting my fix of farming from a slightly surprising and unusual source, Jeremy Clarkson and Clarkson's Farm. It's been a huge hit. Do you talk to him at all?
I do talk to him a lot. Indeed, he won most recently the Farmers Weekly Farming Champion, which was sponsored by us, for what he has done, bringing farming to an audience that had not been engaged.
we're starting to understand farming, perhaps for the first time.
Indeed, it's not my natural viewing, but I watched Clarkson's farm over the summer, and I think it shows how much strain the industry is under, the tight margins, the capital investment, and how you're open to elements out of your control, be it the market or be it the weather.
Yeah. And the huge amount of pressure on time. We've run out of time here, but thanks both very much indeed. Very interesting indeed. And so to the weather. An absolutely gorgeous autumn day yesterday in London. Too gorgeous? Unsettlingly gorgeous? Over to Susan Powell in the Weather Centre. Susan.
Thank you, Andrew. It may have seemed too good to be true, but actually we have another beautiful looking day to come today. Some early cloud across East Anglia and the southeast, but we are looking at skies clearing. This is a weather front that's sitting in place currently, but it's moving through, and behind it lots of sunshine already across the remainder of England, Wales, Northern Ireland and southern and eastern Scotland. Much drier, much brighter here than it was yesterday. Quite windy for western Scotland today. That will feed some showers into the coast. The winds gusting up to gale force potentially at times here. Some showers for the Northern Isles as well. Elsewhere, a little bit of patchy rain out of that front, but a lot of dry weather to come. Sunshine and still warm to the south, 19 or 20 degrees. Looking on into the week ahead, though, we are going to move into some slightly cooler air than we were sitting in last week. So our temperatures will come back to around average values for the time of year rather than above. And by the end of the night tonight, that cooler air will have worked its way south across the UK. So tomorrow morning, a little fresher than we've been used to. Temperatures in the mid-range of single figures. A little bit of rain to come in for Scotland again to start the week. But through the week ahead, not much rain actually to speak of. High pressure will sit to the south of the UK, meaning for many areas it will be dry. There'll be a little bit of early morning mist and fog, but I think we are going to see a lot more pleasant autumn sunshine in the next 5 days or so. Andrew.
And that has to be good news. So far this autumn, 12 of Britain's energy companies have gone bankrupt. But the big six are still standing firm. Can they last? OVO Energy is the third largest with 4.5 million customer. Its founder, Stephen Fitzpatrick, is with me. So a very straightforward question to start with. Are you sure that you're going to make it through this winter?
Yeah, we've been well hedged throughout the whole winter. We've been buying...
That means you've been bought up energy
so hedging
ahead of time.
is buying ahead of time, yes. So we have about 4.5 million customers in the UK. We've been buying power and gas for those customers going back to the start of last year. And we hedge in advance, and unfortunately there are a lot of companies in the market that have sprung up quite recently. There's been some great competition in the UK market. Consumers have benefited, but I think over the last couple of years it's become too easy to get into the energy market. It's a very complicated industry, and I think some people have underestimated some of the risks and how complicated it is. So there are, unfortunately, a lot of companies having a hard time. There's probably going to be more to come.
Well, I was going to ask you, what of the big six? If we have a really cold winter, are you absolutely sure the big six can survive?
There are lots of different scenarios, and at the moment the big issue is not about the temperature and how cold it is, because we can look back in time and say this is how much energy we use at different temperatures and so on. Right. The big uncertainty we've got at the moment is around the price, and as you've already discussed, prices are up 1,000% already in 12 months, and I'm
going to come back to that original question. In those circumstances, with those eye-wateringly high prices and no sign of them coming down, are the big six definitely going to survive?
Andrew, I mean, nobody comes on television and says that they're absolutely definitely anything. But what I can tell you is that there are some energy companies that have not been well hedged, not been well run, and they're suffering. And I think for most of the larger energy companies that have been through this before, I mean, in the very first year that OVO was founded in 2009, energy prices doubled in the first 6 months. So we have been through this kind of thing before. I
guess the reason I'm pressing this is there's a system called the supplier of last resort. So if a big company goes down, then it passes to the next company and they pick up the customers and so on. But if a really big company with millions of customers went down, would that system of last resort really be robust, resilient and reliable?
There's also a backup system called special administration.
It's basically the government move in.
Yeah, Ofgem take over the running of the company. And I think in terms of a very, very large system failure, that's probably what would happen.
Because some of the energy analysts says that if a really big company goes, then that system in turn won't really be robust enough. The government are going to have to put in quite a lot of money to keep the industry going.
The situation we're facing at the moment is that the price cap which we've discussed, is protecting consumers from this enormous and unprecedented spike in energy prices. Consumers are being protected, but at the moment, if we buy gas and electricity on the wholesale market, energy companies are losing a lot of money for every unit they sell. So if a company were to go out of business and then another energy supplier takes over those customers and then has to buy that energy, they'll be selling it at an enormous loss.
So that's a huge loss. So every time you expand at the moment, it's a loss. Because a lot of people think that your company might be looking at taking over Bulb.
So we are very focused right now on our customers. We've hedged well ahead, and we're hedging again into next summer and even into next winter. We're ready to do what needs to be done. The way that the solar process works, Ofgem runs an auction and then appoints somebody to take over those customers. The one thing I would say is that when we hear about the no bailouts for the energy sector and so on, and the industry will have to take care of this, what that really means is that the cost of the failed energy companies gets passed on to other consumers. So it doesn't just disappear.
It sounds to me as if you are not keen to take over Bulb right at this moment.
I would say that we are looking at and preparing for lots of different...
of which that might be one of them.
There's a lot of different scenarios, and of course large energy companies and small energy companies right now, we're all preparing for anything that might happen.
If a supplier with, say, more than 1.5 million customers goes under, are you sure the last resort system works?
The biggest constraint will be around our ability to buy the gas and electricity in an open market. So there is a point where you need to buy so much gas and electricity for those customers, 1.5 million, 2 million customers, that you'd be pushing the price up by buying in the market. And that's where having a longer period of time to manage that would be better. In any case, I would say the one thing to reassure everybody on, in terms of consumers, in the state of the world that we see at the moment, there's really nothing consumers need to worry about in terms of the lights going out this winter, there not being enough power.
That's not going to happen.
No, and then also, because of the price cap, they are protected from the worst of all of this.
In the end, is taxpayers' money going to be needed to keep the energy supply system working?
So I would say when you look at whether it's taxpayers or consumers' money, there is going to need to be a higher price that we pay for energy over time. I think probably what's best for consumers is to see that smoothed out. It's not that we can somehow magically subsidise or make energy cheaper, but it's a good idea for that to be smoothed out so households can prepare for it. If you talk about the consumers paying, what that really means is that everybody's paying the same. And what that means is lower income households end up paying a disproportionately high amount. If we pay for it through the tax system, which is a progressive system, wealthier people of society end up paying more. So I think the one thing I'd like to say is that what we really need to see from government is them to take a look at what's going to happen in a cold weather scenario. We have some really welcome policies, the household support scheme, I think it's £500 million that was announced last week, but that really needs to be maybe 2 or 3 times bigger to prepare for a cold winter scenario.
So up to now we've been talking about, as it were, individual consumers, households. What about the big energy-intensive industries, the cement makers, the steel makers? They've been in to see the government this week, and they say cap for individuals, cap for us too. That's what we need to survive.
So I'm not an expert on energy-intensive industry, energy policy, but I think there is only so much money to go around, and we have to put the lowest income households first. After that, for sure, we can have a discussion. But anybody that's buying
caps for industry, a possible idea?
I think if you're a large energy user, you should be hedging for your demand ahead of time. And I think what we really need to look at more than the very, very short-term impact. We're going to be hosting COP26 in 3 weeks' time, and we need a longer-term energy policy. And the ask that I've got for the government, as well as more support for lower-income households, is that we really need to have an energy policy that's going to span the next generation. It cannot be decided on a 4-year electoral cycle.
There will be people watching, Stephen, who say your company had more than £1 billion of turnover last year. It's a really big company. Why should the taxpayer help companies like yours?
So let's be clear. We're not asking for or expecting any taxpayer support. Our revenues last year were like 4 or 5 billion. So it's
I'm so sorry.
That's great. That's
a few billion out.
But last year, I mean, I think the COVID experience last year was a really good example of just how far the energy industry has come and how much it's changed. Very quickly, we were able to work with government, with our regulator Ofgem, and come together and put in hundreds of millions of pounds of support for low-income households. OVO alone put up £50 million of debt forgiveness and extra credit for customers to make sure that they weren't without power and gas during COVID. We need to work with government again, and I think we need the Treasury, we need BEIS. In fact, one of the things I think we really, really need to start to look at is a dedicated Department for Energy and Climate Change. We used to have one. We no longer have a government department whose job it is to help manage the energy transition. And it's the biggest challenge we face in our time.
Stephen, it's been absolutely gripping talking to you. Thanks so much for coming in. Now then, if you're taking public transport or you're going to the shops, you may have noticed a very big proportion of the people you come across aren't wearing masks anymore. It's almost as if we as a country have decided the coronavirus pandemic is over. But we have much higher rates of infection than many other European countries. I spoke a little earlier to Jenny Harries, who used to be Deputy Chief Medical Officer, and she now heads the UK Health Security Agency. She says one of the biggest current threats is flu, and we could have up to 60,000 deaths.
So this comes from their report from July earlier this year, which was a very helpful report looking at a number of variables for winter and recognising, of course, that we haven't had the flu exposure that we've had previously, so people are more susceptible. But actually, that is the upper range of their estimate, and it was between 11 and 60,000. So it is plausible, but it is one part of a model, and I think we need to think of it in that way. Not to focus on it too much. Now, because there hasn't been so much flu circulating, because we've been wearing masks and staying inside and all of that, I gather that makes it harder to be absolutely sure that this flu vaccine is highly effective on this particular strain of flu. As somebody who's had my flu vaccine, are you concerned about that? So it's a more uncertain year, but I certainly would be encouraging everybody to go and get to the vaccine. As usual, we work with WHO. We look at what's happened on the other side of the world, because obviously their winter season comes first. And we have a multi-strain vaccine, so it will be two influenza A's and 2 influenza B's. But there is a slightly higher degree of uncertainty around that, partly because we've had such few cases, and partly because individuals' health-seeking behaviours, if you like, have meant that they perhaps haven't come to be tested as much, and therefore we won't have so many samples on which to base that decision. So without scaremongering, we are a bit more vulnerable this winter. Yes, I think the important messages here is this is probably the first season where we will have significant amounts of COVID circulating as well as flu. People's behaviours have changed. We're mixing more. Winter weather is coming along. Everybody's going into enclosed spaces. And we do know from the small amount of data that we've had previously that people are at more significant risk of death and of serious illness if they are co-infected with flu and with COVID. And that doesn't seem to be, from our studies, a fact which many of the public understand. Well, let's talk about COVID if we could. We've still got quite a large number of cases, about 40,000 or so each day, and yet that is less than half of what we were being told back in July. Why are we doing so much better, as it were? Well, we've obviously had extremely good vaccine uptake, and that is now preventing very significant amounts of hospitalisation and death. It's over 90%, whichever vaccine you've had, effective against those particular outcomes. But I think the important thing here is each of these models, it's a scenario, a possible scenario. And in fact, we are tracking along one of those scenarios fairly steadily. And probably the difficulty is at this point in the pandemic, it's one of the most difficult times to predict what will come. We have different levels of vaccination. We have a little bit of immunity waning in those in older individuals, which is why we're now starting to put in a COVID booster vaccine. We have slightly different effectiveness in different vaccinations that have been provided. We are running at 120 deaths or so a day. Have we decided as a society that that is an acceptable death rate? So clearly we've got large vaccination programmes ongoing, we've got significant testing. This isn't how we normally treat an endemic disease. So I think the answer to that is very clearly no. We're taking it extremely seriously. But it is important to remember that for an average flu season, it's about 11,000 deaths a year. It's somewhere between 4,000 to 22,000 over the last 4 to 5 years. So we are starting to move to a situation where perhaps COVID is not the most significant element, and many of those individuals affected will, of course, have other comorbidities, which will make them vulnerable to serious illness for other reasons as well.
You mentioned the amount of COVID passing around children at the moment. Now, in England, there's 204,000 children absent from school at the moment. I think that's about 3 times the normal for this time of year. How seriously should we take the problem facing children, given that they're less at risk from the illness?
So, as you say, the critical point is they are less at risk, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't take it seriously. And I think there is a really important balance here, which I think has been well articulated in the media, of how significant the impact of not being in school is. So this is a balanced position. I think the other important thing is that whereas a child with COVID should not be in school, there have been many steps taken to ensure that for most children they can be. And I think important statistic is 99.9% of schools are open. So most children can attend and most will be continuing to benefit from that education.
Do you think that children should be wearing masks in school?
So I think I wouldn't put that at the top of my list of measures. I think the important thing is we should make sure children aren't in school if they are actually infectious. We've got a very good testing programme, and we know that at the start of the term we expected to see a surge in cases. I think this is really important. We saw a surge in cases as they were detected as children came back. It dropped down a bit, and then we've seen another surge.
Dr. Harries, you were talking about variants and the Delta variant a little while ago, and I can remember a year ago we were all obsessed by is there going to be an Epsilon variant, and variant after variant after variant being more deadly and more infectious than the last one. But Dr. Gilbert, who knows more about this than probably anybody else, she doesn't think that's going to happen. She says we normally see that viruses become less virulent as they circulate more easily. No reason to think they'll be different this time round. If COVID changes its spike protein so much it can't interact with the receptor, then it's not going to be able to get inside the cell. So there aren't very many places for the virus to go to have something that will evade immunity but still be a really infectious virus. In other words, stop worrying so much about the next variant. Do you agree with that?
Partly yes, but I think we should stay alert. So I think one of the interesting things we have seen is we've seen a number of different variants arise, and the ones which viewers will probably be most familiar with, the beta, for example, which was first diagnosed confirmed in South Africa. But what we've seen with beta is where Delta has come through and there has been a significant surge, beta has been suppressed, and we think that's happening now with mu and lambda. So with the dominance of Delta, it does look as though many of the other variants which have been detected are becoming extinct, and a number of variants under investigation have risen slightly. We've seen cases and they've become extinct. Now, while that holds, I think that's right, but I don't think it means we should be reducing our overall surveillance systems. We do need to stay alert to see. It's still very early days of a new virus.
As ever, thank you very much indeed for getting up early in the morning and talking to us. Thanks so much.
My pleasure, thanks.
So let's now get a sense of what the Labour thinking is on some of the big issues. Emily Thornberry, Shadow Secretary of State for Trade. Emily Thornberry, welcome. Let me ask you first of all about these price caps. Yeah. All week, the big energy-intensive industries, the cement makers, the steel makers, the paper makers, the glass makers, have been saying we need a price cap too. Do you agree with them?
They have been saying we need something. There has been a debate as to exactly what it is should happen. I think that what's important is that Kwasi Kwarteng listens to what it is that business says. There is a certain amount of kind of briefing going on behind the scenes where Kwasi Kwarteng is saying warm words, you know, quite like this, got to get it past the Treasury. The truth is we need to have a plan and they need to get on with it. But also the truth is we shouldn't be in a situation where we wait until there's a crisis and then react. We need to have proper planning.
I'm sure that's true, but we are in this situation right now. We're in this situation right now.
In the seat before me, right, was a guy from an energy company who said what we should have is a Department for Energy and Climate Change. Now, excuse me, I was in that department, and what we said we should, and what we were doing was we were making sure there were new nuclear power stations. We were making sure that we had gas storage. We were making sure that we were insulating homes. All of these things were happening happening. We were making sure there was offshore and onshore wind. Hang on, this is really important.
I know it's important, but we are where we are now.
Yeah, I know.
And
but
I'm just asking you
as
whether-
opposition, it is fair for us to say that when we were in power, these were the plans we had. The government cut those. We now have another wave of crisis. This government has wave after wave of crisis. And then I'm asked to come on and say, well, if you were in this situation, what would you do tomorrow? And I think it's only fair to make that point.
Sure, but it's also only fair for me on the other side of the table to ask whether you're in favour of a price cap for industry.
Yeah, and my answer is that what we need to be doing is listening to business, and frankly, if there's a strong case being made, we need to take it seriously. And I hope the next person sitting in this chair will tell you what his plan is.
Yes, but you can't tell me yes or no to that.
I can tell you that
question.
we are having meetings with industry, and we are considering what the best way forward is as far as we're concerned, but we also want to make the point that we should not be in a position where we're always having to respond at the very last minute to crises. And then for the government to be saying that it's all part of a cunning plan, you know, there are all these people queuing up at petrol stations, shortages in the supermarkets, all part of a cunning plan, and they want to change Britain, is the biggest example of chutzpah I've heard for a very long time.
Well, here's another thing where I think you probably can give me a clear answer. The so-called green levy. So that's the levy on bills, currently mainly electricity bills, to ensure that people change away from carbon-emitting fuel and heating to different kinds of more green fuel and heating. And there is a proposal that should move from electricity onto gas bills.
Yes.
What is the Labour view?
Yes. So the Labour view is that there are a number of strands to this. The first thing is that we would not in current circumstances. Well, of course we wouldn't be starting here, but we would not be allowing for the universal credit cut. £20 is basically the amount of money that most below average households pays in their fuel bills. So we certainly would not be taking £20 away from families each week. That's the first thing.
These levies are really big, and I just want to know whether you would keep them on for, you know, the net zero goals and all the rest of it.
The next thing that one needs to do is one needs to make sure that houses are properly insulated. And if they had continued with our programme of greener homes over the last 11 years, then we would have huge numbers of homes, millions of homes, that would now be insulated. Because you can have the greenest type of fuel coming into your home, but if it's going straight out the window, it doesn't do anybody any good.
All true. I was asking you a very straightforward question. All true, but I was asking you... Let me ask you about something else. I talked to your leader, Keir Starmer, a couple of weeks ago, and he said he thought that if it was necessary, 100,000 visas should go for HGV drivers to come into the economy. Do you agree with him?
I think that in the short term, we need to make sure that we have enough people doing the jobs.
So,
it isn't just HGV. There are obviously, as you know, there's a large number of other things. And
so I was going to ask you particularly about social care, where it's away from the headlines, but there's 120,000 vacancies in the social care industry in this country. Do you think the visa should be available for them?
I believe that is what the government will do. And I think that what they will do is not just look to Europe, they will look internationally, and they will be bringing people in. And what they will also be finding is there will be greater numbers of vacancies because they're insisting that everybody has a vaccine.
So that would be 220,000 people coming in.
Well, I don't know for sure.
And what about hospitality, where there's 180,000 vacancies?
Listen, what we need to do is we need to have a proper plan. We have been telling the government that it's all very well delivering on Brexit, but you have to make Brexit work. And there are a number of ways that you need to be looking at. And we are warning them that they need a proper strategy.
But it's a direct question about the number of visas that Labour would give to allow these shortages and these real problems in the economy and the social economy not to happen. Well, Boris Johnson says, I won't pull that lever. Would Labour pull that lever?
What I would say is that we have a much more... I don't believe that when people voted for Brexit, they voted for us to stop having any immigration at all. I just don't believe that. I believe that what they voted for was for our politicians to be responsible for making those decisions. And they need to be making responsible decisions in a strategic way, and they're simply not.
All right, Emily Thornberry, thanks very much indeed for coming in and talking to us. Now, apart from being an Oscar-winning movie star, George Clooney is a highly respected film director. His latest outing behind the camera is The Tender Bar, a coming-of-age tale about a boy growing up in small-town America during the 1970s and 80s. His father's walked out on his mother, and so the boy is taken under the wing of his Uncle Charlie, a bartender played brilliantly by Ben Affleck. When I caught up with George Clooney, I began asking him what attracted him to this particular story and why it was so personally important to him in recent times.
We, as part of the human race, have been rather tough on one another for the last year and a half, or probably the last 5 or 6 years. And this was a really kind film.
It is.
It's gentle, and I needed that. And I felt like if I needed that, maybe other people might feel the same way.
Dear Mr. McGuire, it is a great pleasure to inform you that the admissions committee has voted to offer you a place in the Yale class of 1986.
What?
I'm also pleased to notify you that your financial need has been met.
If you're tricking me, I'll kill you.
Read it.
It feels, it's all sorts of things, but it's a nostalgic film for a kind of better America. Yeah. And it's an America where there are no iPhones, there are no tablets, there's none of that stuff. People are still focused on books. Mm-hmm. And to a certain extent, it seems to be a kind of hymn to what you would call the middle class, we call the working class.
Sure. Yeah, well, it is. In fact, there was I think it's closer to, we would call it the working class there too, because they're struggling to get to the middle class, because there is a bit of class that plays out in this. There's a little bit of the have and haves not. There's a line in it where he says the real rich hide so people don't kill them, which is actually true. But there is a nostalgia, I think. It doesn't mean that we're right. We always look backwards and think, God, well, wasn't it nicer then? And, I would imagine if you were African American or gay or any number of things, the answer was no. So we are nostalgic for a time, but I'm not quite sure that it's factually correct.
You've said you now want to be the painter, not the paint. Can you explain what that means?
Well, directing's more fun. Again, the older you get, the roles change. And you have to accept that. You can't try and soften the lens and look younger, and as we all would like to.
Yeah, you're looking terrible, I have to say.
Somebody said to me the other day, how do you feel about turning 60? And it's like, well, there's no options except dead, so I'll take 60. Yeah, I don't know. I enjoy having some control over. It's fun to be able to play with all of these different parts of the film industry. It's fun to be able to write and to direct and to so that you're not just participating in one element of it.
I wonder, in terms of directing this particular film, directing Ben Affleck, who is Uncle Charlie, he's kind of the moral heart of this in many ways. Yeah. But, he's directed himself, and I just wonder, is that a slightly difficult relationship, directing somebody who is the director themselves? No,
not for Ben. Ben, first of all, we won an Oscar with Ben for Argo. We're friends, and he knew that this was a part that he hasn't been offered before. This is a better part than he's gotten, and so he knew it. So he showed up, just ready to do it. And honestly, we're friends, so it's easy. It doesn't take much direction. He's a good actor. It's a good part. The hard part for us was directing in COVID, because this is a family piece. Yeah. So, it would be like as if we're all of us, there's other people in the room besides Andrew and I right now. If we were all like doing a scene, we've all got masks and face masks and everything, and we rehearse, and then you go action and we all whip it off and suddenly all of us are a family. Yeah. It's unusual. It's not the same way we're used to working, but you have good actors and it works out.
And so this film is called The Tender Bar. And the assumption is basically that the best place for childcare is a bar full of elderly boozers.
Right. Well, I'm Irish, so I think that that's exactly right. I think you've hit the nail on the head. I grew up in Kentucky, and I was a tobacco farmer, and I did a lot of stuff. And I also, my Uncle George, who I was named after, who's a pretty good boozer, and he lived a lot of times on a horse track, a racetrack in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I would spend the summers working the racetrack, and I'd stay at his apartment, which was above a bar very similar to this. And I'd go down and, buy him a pack of cigarettes, and, all the same characters were in the bar. And so I grew up around that and understood it. And I have to say, I have a great fondness for that period of time.
You're a man you're a Democrat, but you're slightly to the left, as it were, in American politics.
Sure.
You're a friend of President Biden. You've known him for a long time.
Sure.
And looking at his poll numbers, which are really quite bad at the moment, things have gone wrong. What would you say about what's happened to the White House since he's taken over, and what's happened to America since he's taken over?
Well, I mean, it's, you know, you can't. It's like taking a battered child and thinking everything's gonna be okay, and you know, his first day in school. There's a lot of things that have to be repaired. You know, there's a lot of healing that has to happen, and it's going to take time. Poll numbers come up and go down. I would expect them to go back up again. You know, Donald Trump's numbers went up and down.
He's still there, prowling around in the rhododendrons.
Yeah. You know, he's going to be a factor for a while. It's so funny because, you know, he was just this knucklehead. I knew him before he was, you know, a president. He was just a guy who was chasing girls. You know, every time he went out, he'd come over and be like, "What's the name of that girl?" You know, that's all he was. And the idea that there's this whole group of people that, you know, that they think he's the champion of, which he certainly can't stand in real life. But, you know, he's gonna play this out for a while, and we'll see where we go with it as a country. My hope is we have a little better sense than to do that again. My hope.
We've talked about politics in the past and again today, and you're very fluent on this. At your age and stage, a lot of people are looking forward for the next big thing. Do you ever see yourself, like some other actors, going into politics?
No. No, because I actually would like to have a nice life. I turned 60 this year, you know, and I had a conversation with my wife, and I said, you know, we're working a lot, as we both do, and I said, we have to think of these as the halcyon years. You know, if we have our health, which we do, knock on wood for a minute, and I'm 60 and I can, you know, still play basketball and still do the things I love. But in 20 years I'll be 80, and that's a real number. Doesn't matter how much you work out, doesn't matter how, you know, what you eat, you're 80. And so I said, we have to make sure we enjoy and live these years in the best possible way.
So coasting quietly into a period where you do almost nothing at all.
Exactly. Well, listen, instead of doing 3 jobs a year, I'll do 1. Because you can't, I mean, you, I think, must agree, even the slowing down and enjoying your life, not working would really be a bummer.
It really would. You're absolutely right about that. George Clooney, thanks very, very much indeed for talking to us.
It's always good to see you, man. Really good.
George Clooney, and The Tender Bar debuts at the London Film Festival tonight. It's going to be released on the 17th of December at selected UK locations and then on Amazon Prime Video from the 7th of January. Kwasi Kwarteng, the business secretary, has spent much of this week closeted in crisis meetings with the companies using the most energy in Britain, the steel makers, pharmaceutical companies, cement makers, paper makers and many, many more. Mr. Kwarteng, very straightforward question to start with. They say that they want a cap on energy prices, just like consumers have. Are they going to get one?
What we are providing is a huge amount of support, as we have done over many years with the energy intensive users schemes where we support industry. And the other thing I would say about this, Andrew, is that only this summer we had an issue in terms of extending the steel safeguards. And I work very closely with Treasury colleagues and also Department for International Trade colleagues to extend those safeguards. And as you know, I'm very, very focused on protecting our industries.
We've been hearing industry bosses all week saying, if we don't get a lot more help, my factory will close, there'll be this shortage, there'll be that shortage. Straight question, do you believe them?
I think it's a critical situation. Clearly, you know, I'm speaking to industry, as you've said, all the time. And high gas prices, they've quadrupled this year, are making an impact. And that's why I'm, as you say, speaking to people, listening and trying to work out a way forward.
Now, we read that you've asked for billions from the Treasury, either for a price cap or for some kind of winter help for industry. Is that true?
I have not asked for billions. We've got existing schemes. I'm working very closely with Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, to get us through this situation. I think he showed a great deal of flexibility when he allowed £500 million to be dispersed by local authorities for vulnerable consumers. And we're working to see what we can do in terms of protecting industry.
So no extra help at all for energy companies?
Well, that's a separate issue. There are energy suppliers. So you're quite right. I've been very clear that we're not going to bail out failing energy suppliers.
Right.
Typically, as I've said before, between 5 and 8 companies leave the market every winter.
So same question about the energy-intensive companies, the steel makers and so on. Is there going to be extra government help for them this winter or not?
As I've said, we are looking to find a solution. I mean, they're different from suppliers.
That sounds like yes.
No, it doesn't sound like yes at all. We already have existing support, and we're looking to see whether that's sufficient to get us through this situation.
But you've been told that, you know, major factories, major production centres might have to close this winter. You used to poo-poo the idea that we're going to go to a 3-day working week or back to the 70s or any of that as scaremongering nonsense. But it is beginning to look as if the situation is really quite serious.
I think it's a challenging situation, but as I've always said, the energy supply is not an issue. We've got security of supply, we've got flowing sources of gas, and electricity. We've got a diversity in terms of our electricity generation mix. We've got a bit of nuclear, we've got renewables, we've got gas. And through that mix, I think we've got a great deal of resilience. And this is a global problem, Andrew.
I was going to say that. In the short term, like me, in a sense, you're just an observer of the international energy prices. There's nothing that you or the British government can do to bring those prices down.
Well, there are two things. So there's the international gas price, which you've observed, is not in our power to change.
You just have to watch it.
What I can do is provide as much support as I can for industry and consumers. And as you will know, the key lever, the key way we protect consumers is through the price cap. You'll also know that many of the industry players have suggested maybe we lift the price cap, maybe it's a temporary change to it. But I've been very resolute and clear that the price cap stays.
A temporary change, you've said. A lot of the industry would like you to shift the next change in the price cap from April back to January. They say that would help them hugely. Is that something you're looking at?
So let me be very clear about the price cap. The price cap was set in August for the 6-month period between the 1st of October and the 1st of April. That isn't going to change.
Not going to change.
That's not going to change. And I've been very clear about that. And the reason why it isn't is because we need to protect consumers. That's been my first and foremost objective, to protect consumers from the wild spikes in prices.
Ofgem haven't ruled out that price cap going up by £800 in April. Is there a limit in your mind as to how high that could possibly go? Will you intervene if it's going up by £1,000, £2,000, £3,000?
My primary focus, my 100% focus actually, is getting through the next few months. I can't speculate on what the price cap will be in the 1st of April to 1st of October period next year. It'll be set, as you know, probably in February. But of course, nobody knows what the wholesale price of gas will be in 4 months' time.
So what happens if there's a really bad cold winter?
Well, if there's a really bad cold winter, the price cap stays. So there's a limit as to how much consumers will pay. We also have.
But what about the companies?
We also have winter fuel payments, and we've also got the warm home discount. So our primary focus, protecting consumers, particularly vulnerable ones, stays. With respect to the energy companies, there is pressure, as you've heard earlier in the programme. We've got what's called a SOLAR process, which stands for supplier of last resort. It's been holding up pretty well. And
but the real worries about that now, aren't there? Particularly, I mean, if several million customers are suddenly thrown into that system, costing billions and billions of pounds for whoever picks them up, there are real doubts in the industry whether that system can survive.
So the system was has been tested the last month, actually, and it exists, and it's important that viewers recognise this. It's existed for a number of years. And typically 5 to 8 companies leave the market every year. This year, as you say, there have been more, and the system has been pretty robust. And I speak to the chief executive of Ofgem, I speak to the industry every day, and we examine on a daily basis whether the system can withstand the companies leaving the market. And it has so far managed to do that.
If one of the big 6 went, would the supplier of last resort system, are you absolutely sure, be resilient and robust enough to survive?
I'm absolutely sure that we will have mechanisms to deal with that.
That's not a yes. That's
well,
not
no. Well, the supplier of last resort has worked very effectively up till now, but
we're in new territory now.
There is, but there are two levers, if you like. There's a supplier of last resort. There's a thing called the SAR, which is a special administrative regime. Between the two, we are confident that we can absorb whatever happens, and that above all, consumers, customers will have no disruption in supply. That's an important.
Are you wargaming the collapse of one of the big 6?
I speak to the industry, as you know, and I speak to Jonathan Brearley, who's the CEO of Ofgem, the regulator, on a daily basis, and I have done for the last 6 weeks. And we're always looking at ways in which the system might be vulnerable, but we're also increasingly confident that what we have now can see us through the winter.
Are we going to see new levies on gas bills to fund low-carbon heating?
No, we're not. We're not going to see that.
You're not going to move the levies from electricity bills to gas bills?
We're not going to do that, certainly in the period of the next price cap.
Would you get rid of green levies entirely? Because some countries have done in this situation.
I think when we look at the gas situation, our reliance on gas, the fact that high gas prices, they've quadrupled, have left us, the whole world actually exposed in this way. I'm one of those who thinks that we need more renewables. We need to double down on the energy transition. We need to invest in hydrogen, as we're doing, and get a better diversity of supply away from fossil fuels. And that's exactly where we're going.
OK, can I ask you about another big issue facing the country? Of the 5,000 HGV visas that the Prime Minister announced, how many people have actually applied for those?
Very few.
And you know the number?
I think it's probably double digits, but I'm not sure the exact number. Is it 27 or 30?
I think it was reported at 29 at one point.
Yes.
So it's 27, I beg your pardon. You were right and I was wrong. 27.
Okay.
But almost none compared with what we need. So my question is, what happens now?
So it's a very interesting point. So the reason why the visa hasn't been taken up is that there's a shortage right across the world, actually. I mean, I was just reading an article about the US where there's a huge shortage of drivers. There's a huge shortage, pressure on the supply chain. And the reason why people aren't coming is that there are shortages in their own country.
I understand the reason. I'm just wondering what we're going to do about it as a country.
I think the main thing, and Grant Shapps has been very clear about this, we're actually attracting more and more people, British people, to the HGV driver, to that profession. More and more people are applying. And I think that's the key. We've got to train people in our country with the skills to do those jobs.
We were told 5,500 poultry visas have also been, poultry worker visas have also been allowed. Do we know how many of those?
I don't know. I mean, with poultry is probably a DEFRA issue, a different department. But I can certainly get back to you on the data.
All right, thanks very much. Let me ask you about another thing. You've got a big decision coming this week on your desk, whether or not to approve the Akwind cable project in Portsmouth. Now, since Akwind started that project, it and other associated businesses owned by Russian Viktor Fedotov have given £700,000 to the Conservatives, and the public face of Akwind, who's Alexander Temerko, has also publicly donated over £700,000 to the Conservatives. If you approve that deal, surely you have to give the money back.
So the way in which these deals are done, we rely on official advice. So as Secretary of State, I will get official advice as to whether to approve or reject the application. And I will be guided by that advice. It would be preemptive for me to say which way.
You have said you're in favour of this in the past, haven't you?
I've said,
and therefore some people say, are you the right person to take?
I've never commented on this specific project. I've said very broadly that I'm very much in favour of more interconnectors because they can actually get electricity sources of power cheaply from the continent. And in many cases, it helps with our decarbonisation, because certainly in France, a lot of that power is generated through nuclear power. So broadly, I'm in favour of interconnectors. I haven't said anything about this.
Okay, two tranches of £700,000 from two Russian businessmen into the Conservative Party, after which they get a deal that they really want. That doesn't look great. Should you not, I ask again, give the money back?
I think you're confusing things, because I've said...
I think you are.
Well, forgive me. No. I've said very explicitly and as clearly as I can, and I'll say it again, I will be relying on official advice. The officials have not been compromised or been funded by these businessmen, and they will have an objective view, and I will be strongly guided by it.
OK, final question. Are you absolutely sure the lights will stay on this winter?
Yes, I am.
All right. Kwasi Kwarteng, thanks very much for coming in and talking to us. Thanks all my guests, and of course to you for watching. I'll be back here in the news studio at the same time next week, but until then, goodbye.
Thank you.